Hello and welcome to Bharatshakti.in. I'm Brig SK Chatterji. We're going to be having an episode once again on our Neighborhood Focus series. Today, the focus is going to be on Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is in a turmoil, whether you call it economic, whether you call it political, whether you call it both. They haven't seen this kind of an atmosphere since they were independent. I have with me, go ahead with this discussion, Nitin Gokhale, the editor-in-chief Bharatshakti.in, is also StratNewsGlobal. Nitin's been a Sri Lanka watcher for a long time. In fact, I won't just say watcher, he's been deeply involved in Sri Lanka for a long time. He covered the Eelam War IV. He's also been in touch with most of the senior leadership of Sri Lanka. He should be able to give us the state of affairs which is now and the state of affairs as it's going to be maybe a couple of months, maybe the odd year or more ahead. Thanks, Nitin. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Brig Chatterji.
Nitin, there are two major aspects of this crisis that Sri Lanka is faced with. One is the political aspect, the other is the economic aspect. Now, let's get on to the economic aspect first of all. Can you give me a little bit of the background and what is the current status right now as far as the Sri Lankan economy is concerned, really?
So current state is, I think, very well known to almost everyone who reads or watches news, that Sri Lanka is in such deep trouble economically that they didn't even have money to buy 1 day of petrol supplies, for instance, for their entire population or for whatever their requirement. But they've just received some $160 million temporary loan from the World Bank to buy fuel. They were not able to pay for shipments of fuel or energy supplies that they need for their country. But that's only one symptom of this entire economic situation. It has been building up for almost 2.5, 3 years, ever since December 2019, when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected with a very overwhelming majority. And one of the first things that he did was to keep his promise in the manifesto to cut taxes that were imposed on the people, which are normal, the value-added tax. He reduced it by 50%. And as bad luck would have it for him and his government, COVID hit the world very badly from February 2020. So Sri Lanka, which is heavily dependent on tourism inflows and tourism spending, tourist spending, was hit badly for 2 years. Nearly 12% of their GDP is dependent on tourism. Tourism stopped because nobody was willing to travel. There was no way to travel. They had their own restrictions. So that completely took away whatever income they used to get. They actually used to get, on an average, about $6 billion a year from tourism in Sri Lanka. Third point was that their remittances of their expatriates, Sri Lankan expatriates abroad, also used to form a substantial part of their earnings, foreign exchange earning. Even those Sri Lankans had to come back because of the COVID pandemic, and they came home. So more or less the remittances dried up. And this is only the icing on the cake. The worst part was that for years together, the governments, successive governments, were borrowing from either the IMF or from countries like Sri Lanka, China and India. And the previous government, Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government, which was Maithripala Sirisena as president and Ranil Wickremesinghe as the prime minister, they also additionally went to the commercial markets to borrow. And the interest outgo of that commercial loans, which they took, was very high. Almost $900 million to $1 billion a year. So all this combined put them in the current situation, where there's no money to buy, there's no dollars available. And right now they're struggling, but for the help from India largely in every aspect. And this temporary loan that is being given, they are in that kind of a situation right now economically.
Right, Nitin, economic situation, well, you explained to us, it couldn't have been worse. And the big issue is, I'm sure there were indicators for a long time. So somewhere or the other, the leadership is to be really blamed for it. And we have had this party of all three brothers being there together, ruling Sri Lanka. And that's possibly one of the reasons. But now that there is a change in the leadership, so Gotabaya remains, and you've got Ranil also coming in as Prime Minister. Firstly, is this combination going to work? Is this combination going to be acceptable to the Sri Lankans on the streets with whatever reputation that they have earned for themselves so far? And how do you see it really panning out?
So it's a very good question because nobody knows how it's going to work out.
I thought
frankly,
you knew the.
I know
really
that,
well.
but I don't know how people will react. But I'm saying this was the least, the most acceptable combination, really, because somebody has described Ranil Wickremesinghe as the adult in the room, in a way. He is experienced. He is well accepted by the West because of his background, his education, his reputation. Because now they have to go to the IMF and the World Bank. This was one of the requirements, that you need somebody who is well known in the West and to these institutions, who can negotiate, who can have some reputation there, some standing there. That's why Ranil Wickremesinghe is a good choice from that angle. If you look at it from a domestic angle, he was rejected by the people. He could not win himself, somehow managed to scrape through and came to parliament. His entire party, UNP, was wiped out in the parliamentary elections in 2021. So there is no legitimacy in that sense, political legitimacy. But the situation is so extraordinary in political situation in Sri Lanka that this was the best possible combination. Gokhale Rajapaksa, not a professional politician. He was an army officer. Then he became a bureaucrat, military bureaucrat or a security bureaucrat. His other brothers, his elder brother Mahinda Rajapaksa, has been a professional politician for more than 50 years. But he had lost credibility, and so had Basil Rajapaksa, who was the finance minister. A lot of demands in the initial stage of the crisis was that the politicians of the Rajapaksa clan must go, because they have mishandled it. Not so, the anger was not directed so much at Gokhale Rajapaksa, because everybody felt that he was being constrained and he was hemmed in by his family and the constraints that come with the family connections. So having got rid of them in a way from the cabinet, now he's got a free hand, he can run the country. And Ranil Wickremesinghe, who has a love-hate relationship with the Rajapaksas, was the only choice left because, as I said, experienced and well-known. Sajith Premadasa, leader of the opposition, actually blew his chances. He was offered offered the prime ministership at the head of the national unity government, but he wanted Gokhale Rajapaksa to go, the presidency to go, the executive presidency, which was impossible at this moment in time. It can happen when situation stabilizes, economy sort of comes back on the rails, all that. So right now, that is the situation. They've got numbers in the parliament, but how long will this process last? An IMF loan or restructuring is not going to happen in a hurry. Where are they going to find the money in the short run, say in the next 3-4 months? Because this year, they have to pay back something like $75 million in the interest in the next 2-3 months. Then they have to buy fuel. They import a lot of things in Sri Lanka. Even milk powder, for instance, is imported from abroad. All the requirement of milk is imported.
Why?
Because somebody made a mistake 30-40 years ago, that they allowed companies, big companies from New Zealand and Australia, to take over the entire milk market. There is hardly any cattle. There is no cow milk, there is no buffalo milk, or very little cow milk, buffalo milk in Sri Lanka. So they are used to milk powder and such products, the dairy products, from abroad. Now that takes away a large chunk of your foreign exchange, which is precious. So all those things need to be corrected. It's a historical kind of legacy which they're facing right now. And to overcome that is going to be an extraordinary effort and a very painful effort going forward.
So you feel the team will also be accepted on the streets?
There is no other choice, really. I mean, if you don't accept them, people are, of course, right now angry. They're saying go home is the protest site. It says now they've added Ranil, go home, all that. But these are natural reactions of people who are angry at being deprived. And so they're used to a good life in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's HDI, the Human Development Index, is far better than any other country in Asia. Used to be. And they're used to good life, luxurious, not luxurious life, but good, well-to-do people, most of them. There was hardly any poverty in Sri Lanka in that sense. They got used to a lot of subsidies from the government. Now, suddenly, all those subsidies are going to vanish, if not already taken away. And there is this shortage, there is a deprivation. They never had to queue up for anything in the earlier days, all that. So this anger is natural, and I think it will subside in coming months.
Well, I hope it works out on the streets. I think that's very important in a democracy. But the IMF is going to have a lot of conditionalities in case they're going to bail them out or give them some sort of loan, whatever be the financial package that the IMF can work out on. And a lot of it will depend on perhaps getting those subsidies to be removed, etc. How do you see the IMF really working out?
So I had an interview I had done an interview with the Finance Minister Ali Sabri, who went and led the Sri Lankan initial effort with the IMF. And he was very clear that hard, painful decisions are now a must. Closing down huge loss-making public sector enterprises like the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Lanka oil, they won't of course close that down, but Sri Lankan Airlines, for instance, it is worse than what Air India used to be at one time when it was with Indian government. And there are several others like that. Subsidy will go, like you said, IMF will have a lot of conditionalities, and therefore this painful effort will have to be really implemented on ground. There's no other choice again. IMF is the only institution that can provide large and long-term loans. Other countries like India have stepped in for a temporary arrangement or a temporary bridge loan, if you can want to call it, just to give them a respite. But that is the only available alternative, and there is no choice but to accede to what IMF demands are.
Let's talk about India. What's India been doing? What's India expected to do? I think we've done a lot, but is that enough? Or should we go in more with whatever be our geopolitical, geostrategic objectives also being there?
No, I think India has done extremely well in not putting any conditions in giving money, aid, and in kind, a lot of things to Sri Lanka over the past, I would say, 5 months now, starting with from January. It has given fuel. It has given long-term soft loans for buying essential commodities and medicines. Fertilizer, 65,000 tons of urea has just been agreed upon on a maybe 20-year kind of payment terms. And India has held Sri Lanka's hand without any conditions. As we speak, I think today the Sri Lankan High Commissioner to India, Mahinda Morogoda, has just met National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. And I think they've also spoken about what are the next steps that go forward. So India, without reservation, without taking into account the ups and downs in the relationship since the year 2000 or even 2006 onwards, when Eelam War was launched by Sri Lanka, has unreservedly gone and helped Sri Lanka, which they are conscious about, that India has come to their aid. It's the next door neighbor, it's the closest friend and neighbor, and therefore that is helpful. But again, as I said, it's a temporary measure in no matter how much India gives. Already, I think $3.2 billion worth of aid has gone into Sri Lanka from India in the past 6 months. How much more India can put in is always questionable. And it's always a moot point whether India can give more, because India also has its own problems and own issues to take care of. So that's where it stands today.
Well, let's get the Chinese into the game. When it comes to Sri Lanka, Chinese are very important, of course. What's the Chinese response, let's say, to the Indians bailing them out to this point, as also the International Monetary Fund?
Well, they're not happy with both because, of course, that contest, I will not call it rivalry, but the contest between India and China over Sri Lanka has been fierce for the past 20 years or so. And clearly here, India has an upper hand in this past 1 year or so. Sri Lanka has taken a lot of loans from China in the past. And in return, when they have not been able to return those loans or repay those loans, they have also grabbed land and long-term lease or even equity shares in some of these the joint ventures with Sri Lanka. So they had done all that before this crisis really erupted. It has contributed to the crisis also, but now they are quiet. They are quiet, but they have made one statement where they have expressed their unhappiness about Sri Lanka going to the IMF for restructuring of their debt and getting IMF loan, because there is also this concern in China that their books of account will be opened when the IMF comes in, and then all the dealings that would have happened, whichever dealing, underhand, above board, all that will be open to public scrutiny, or at least the IMF scrutiny. So that they're not happy. So they're not happy with either India coming in such a big way and in a very welcoming manner by the Sri Lankans, and the IMF also coming in. Right now, they are waiting and watching. They have not made any other moves right now. They're not even willing to put any money on the table right now. They're waiting and watching.
Well, right, Nitin, thank you. I think we finish it over here. There's a long road ahead of Sri Lankans as far as this crisis is concerned. They've got to find the funds, both from India, both from the International Monetary Fund, from other countries. And maybe at the end of the day, the relationship between India and Sri Lanka will be a little firmer than what we have seen, let's say, a couple of years back. Thank you, Nitin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigadier Chatterji.
Thank you, viewers. Thanks for logging on to Bharatshakti.in. Do subscribe to our social media channel. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and do like us on social media wherever you are logged in.